In today's video, we're going to be breaking down the fight between Merab Dvalishvili and Umar Nurmagomedov. We'll take a look at the fight clips going round by round. I'll get the pen out onto the screen to see how the whole fight unfolded. I think this fight really showed us the best, or in parts showed us the best of both these fighters. There were moments early on where Umar had some real success, but I think he failed to capitalise on those moments that could have had a massive impact on the outcome of that fight. At the same time, Merab Dvalishvili did what he does best. He went through the gears and finished really strong. And there is one technique that he used that we're going to be really looking at in this video that caused the tide to turn. After two great rounds for Umar, there was this one technique that started getting through to Umar that really could have changed the outcome of the fight. Hello guys and welcome back to Fight Energy. Before we get into looking at the fight clips themselves, I do want to make a point to say how good this fight was. It was a clear 48-47 in my eyes, and I know that the thumbnail or the title says how Merab broke Umar. I know that might be a little bit disrespectful, but I want to make the point that it was Merab imposing his will on Umar that really caused the tide of this fight to turn and led him to run away with it in the end. I don't think that Umar mentally broke by any means. I just think he was so exhausted. He may have had a broken hand. I know that that was spoken about after the fact. But either way, Merab imposed his will. Merab was the reason why Umar was so tired by the end of that fight and why he offered very little in terms of meaningful attacks in the last couple of rounds. Don't get me wrong, there were some shots, and we'll be looking at either rounds 3 or 4 to show the impactful shots that Umar was still able to throw, but really from round 3, Merab was largely in the driver's seat. Despite Umar clearly winning the first 2 rounds in my opinion, and in the opinion of 2 if not 3 of the judges, there were still some signs in those first 2 rounds that Merab did have the slight upper hand, and we're going to be getting into those very shortly. However, those back 3 rounds show exactly why I call Merab the ultimate 5-round fighter. Not just the tactical stuff, but also the showboating, which I'd almost lump into the tactical side of things, because he knows he's a decision fighter, and the showboating, pointing at Umar when he's slow to get back up to his feet, all these things look great for Merab in the eyes of the judges. Merab knows pretty well that his fights are going to a decision, so he wants to use every old trick in the book to show the judges that he is in the driver's seat. Anyway, that's enough talk about the fight itself. Let's take a look at this first clip from the first round. Now, the first round saw some really good exchanges on the feet, with Umar largely having the upper hand, which is why we all gave him that first round. But I wanted to pick out this clip for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's the distance between Merab and Umar. You can't really see here because Jason Herzog is blocking the view, but they had this big distance between them, which generally you think would benefit the kickboxer, in this case being Umar. However, the way in which he was maintaining this distance just invited pressure onto him from Merab that did have me worried in this first round. So him keeping this really big distance where neither fighter could strike against each other, strangely enough, this early on, I already thought that it could benefit Merab, because rather than Umar deciding to close the distance and pressuring against Merab, which is probably the only thing you can do at this point, because if you stand off Merab, he's only going to come forward, push you back into the fence and do the work, as we saw later on. But Umar was keeping this distance, and when he did come in, it was only for a couple of shots and then he moved backwards again. I think we're going to see that in one of the clips coming up soon. And now if I can just move forward a few frames to get to the other point I wanted to make from this clip, it's this technique which we saw over and over again on Saturday night from Merab, and it's him stepping in, dipping his head. This isn't just Merab, by the way, this is so many wrestlers who use this technique, including Islam Makhachev, Khabib and the Dagestani camp. So Umar should be used to seeing it. But Merab dips his head and throws that big right overhand. And the reason I'm picking this out is because it does come up time and time again in this fight and is very relevant. But as you can see here, Merab actually throws this punch at Umar's chest, which I really like. Look, head down, swinging, big overhand right. Most strikers and kickboxing purists wouldn't particularly like this. But the fact that he aims it at Umar's chest means that he's always going to hit the target. Because if Umar, as he lowers his hands expecting a shot from Merab, if he does try and duck out the way, this punch will hit him in the face. Whereas he's still standing quite tall, it's going to hit him in the chest. Either way, you're going to hit the target. If Umar did drop his level with a shot aimed to his head, it might go right over him. And Umar's such a good counter puncher that he could get his own shots off. So that's the first clip that I wanted to look at in this video to show 2 things very early on that had me slightly worried for Umar's prospects. Allowing Merab to have that distance and not closing it when Umar wanted to, but almost inviting Merab's pressure. I just didn't think that was a good game plan. And secondly, Merab showing his weapon of choice in this fight to dip his head and throw a big right overhand aimed at Umar's chest. Now, the adaptation of this shot was one of the reasons why I believe Merab won this fight. One reason why he was able to tire out Umar so much. And we are going to get onto that. But next, I want to look at one thing that Umar did really well in this first round, and I wish that he'd have done more of it. So this took place with only 25 seconds left in the first round and gave me a lot of optimism for Umar. And it's a technique that TJ Dillashaw used to do a lot, the switch step moving in. So as you can see here, Umar steps through, throwing a fake left kick. And you can see Merab, his view's partially blocked here, but you can see Merab's left arm and his right arm actually come all the way down for this. So Umar's able to step through, so he goes from southpaw to orthodox, keep it playing through. Umar's throwing, we've just changed the view here, Umar's throwing a left hand, a really nice long left hook to Merab that doesn't really touch him. I think it just skims off his nose basically, but he keeps stepping through and lands a really solid, you can see the impact that made here, a really solid right hand to Merab's chin. So with this fake left kick switch step, Umar's able to close the distance on Merab, which is something that is really important to do against a pressure fighter like Merab. He's able to close the distance and land a really nice shot. All I wanted him to do after this, as someone who does like Umar and wanted it to be a really good fight, is for him to keep the pressure on and push Merab against the fence. However, as you can see here, we're going to keep it playing through for a few more frames. Merab is rocked by this. He's stunned. You can see whenever Merab does that little smile, you can tell that he has been hit by a good shot just from that smile. There's just no urgency from Umar to do anything. He sets his feet again and allows Merab to momentarily recover. Look, I'm not saying that Merab was really hurt by this shot. It definitely got through. But this closing the distance, this switch step, I was really happy to see it. I just wish that he'd done this more often and done more of it, because he had success with it. And against a fighter like Merab, it's so important that you capitalise on that moment, because you're not going to have that many over 25 minutes. So that was round one, and the clips that I showed you there largely tell the story. Both guys had some success on the feet. Umar looked a lot more technical. He was throwing more of a variety of shots, including kicks. But really, he was holding back at the same time. Maybe he was conscious that he doesn't have the cardio of Merab, so didn't want to blow his load too soon. But I do feel like there were moments there that Umar could have maybe not closed the show, but definitely could have done more damage to Merab. So moving on to round two and another Umar round, but there were more signs in this round, clearer signs I should say, that the fight was starting to head in Merab's direction. So the first clip that we're going to look at is when Umar landed a beautiful takedown, but he just failed to capitalise on it. What could have been? And the reason I say that is because moments like this genuinely could have made such a big difference in the fight. I do want to admire this takedown though, firstly, because look, it might sound like I'm being harsh on Umar at times. I'm not. It was a close fight. 48-47 is a close fight. And just because Merab finished really strongly doesn't mean that it wasn't competitive, because it was. And this takedown, it actually came after a failed Merab takedown attempt. As you can see, Umar hooks Merab's foot here, meaning that Merab is off balance. Let's keep playing it through a few more frames. Continues to elevate Merab's leg, moving up behind his knee as he has two grips on his hips. So he's controlling his waist and using the leverage of that left foot. Really, really clean. Pulls him back, almost straight into back control. But as you can see, Umar's leg here, he doesn't have his hooks in. Merab's leg is over the top here. And this is one of those moments that really, really could have turned the tide of this fight. We're going to keep playing through just a few more frames. Merab doesn't want to engage on the ground at all with Umar. His first thoughts is to get back to his feet. So straight away you can see this post. He's trying to elevate himself, get straight back up to his feet. We're going to keep playing it through. Umar right now, if he had got his hooks in, if he'd been able to get his legs over into Merab's back, even one leg at this point, he really could have had a really strong end to this round. There was still 3 minutes, look at the clock there, there was still 3 minutes left in this round. Yes, Umar was already getting tired a round and a half into the fight, but if he'd been able to get some control time on the ground, it could have really, really made a big difference. And Merab is able to get back onto his feet. A huge moment in the second round, a truly huge moment. And look, Merab's very good at getting back to his feet as well. So there's no shame in Umar not being able to secure back control, secure a dominant position on the ground. He got an amazing takedown. If he'd been able to get some of that control time in the second round, it could have made a big difference. It would have been less taxing on his cardio, and he would have gone into the third round a fresher fighter. Still focusing on the positives from Umar, he was able to get Merab down, almost had back control, and then this clip that we're going to look at now shows how dynamic his striking is. But I really want you to remember this clip because we're going to be referring to it later on to show how a fatigued version of Umar was able to be nowhere near as effective on the feet. Let's take a look at this clip. Now, even though Umar doesn't really get a clean shot off here, it's really important to note how energetic he looks, how much pop there is on these strikes. And it's in slow-mo, so you probably can't really tell. But that knee partially lands sort of to the chest, to the arm of Merab. And he's all over him at this point. And this is exactly what we needed to see. This kind of pressure being put on Merab. Because Merab's chin does come high. We've seen him be vulnerable to left hooks from Sean O'Malley. This left hook partially lands. And then a right hand from Umar. There we go. A right hand from Umar kind of clips Merab on the way out. But yeah, we saw left hooks landed on Merab by Henry Cejudo, by Marlon Moraes. And it was a weapon that we thought we would see in the Sean O'Malley fight. But Umar swarming Merab here was a really good sign. But like I said, I want you to remember this knee because we will be revisiting this technique in a few clips' time. In the next clip, we're moving to the final 10 seconds of round number 2, and Merab's pressure was getting relentless at this point. Another good round for Umar, but you could tell at the end of this round Merab's forward pressure was getting to Umar. He did look visibly more tired. And remember what I just said about Merab dipping his head and throwing that overhand right. We're about to see a variation of that technique now, which really did Merab a lot of favours in this fight. So again, I do want to mention that Umar was looking more fatigued at this point. 10 seconds left in round number 2, and Merab similarly dips his head. Umar may be expecting a shot around the chest level. You can see where his left hand goes. However, Merab sneaks that right hand, a low right hook to the body. Really nice, and it is a good, impactful shot. And you know, you can just tell sometimes on TV, despite how good these fighters' poker faces are, you can tell when these shots get through. And here Merab goes for a sort of a clinch here, but you could tell that this shot took all the wind out of his sails. And these kind of shots are money in the bank. Merab knows that alongside his relentless pressure, landing some of these shots to the body, they're really going to pay dividends in rounds 3, 4 and 5, which is typically where Merab does his best work. As you could see there, whilst round 2 was another Umar round, clearly Merab's pressure was starting to get to Umar, and Merab started targeting those shots to the body. Now we're going to look at round 3, and this was a clear Merab round. Umar had visibly slowed at this point, and Merab started to style on Umar, playing up to the crowd and things like that. And as I said at the start, all these things are great for the judges to see. So whilst Merab is turning up his work rate, really putting the pressure on Umar, even if not all of his shots are landing, even if not all of his takedowns are succeeding, the fact that he's able to style on Umar whilst putting him under massive pressure is such a positive sign for the judges. And remember, in round 1, I was speaking about both fighters being out of range. This was not an issue in round number 3. Umar was clearly fatigued, as I just mentioned. He wasn't easily able to get out of range, and Merab just kept marching forward. He didn't respect what was coming back at him because it had really, really slowed. Umar's shots didn't have the same pop on them. And as you're going to see from this clip, if you refer back to that knee that we spoke about just before, take a look at this clip and see how it compares. This clip is taken from a sequence where Merab is backing Umar up against the fence time and time again. He's landed a couple of takedowns already. And now we see both fighters stood in range like in the previous round. And Umar again goes for a left knee at Merab, and Merab times it perfectly. He doesn't respect the pop coming his way again. Umar slowed down. The knee, even if it had landed, wouldn't have been so effective. And Merab lands a nice right hand on Umar's chin. So if you remember, Umar, you can actually see that Umar's going for that same left hook that he tried to throw off the knee last time. These combinations are so instilled in the mind of these fighters, but even though he's way out of range and Merab's right hand is still up, having just landed on Umar's chin, it's nowhere near connecting. Merab actually throws a left hook of his own, which misses. But as you can see in that clip, Merab's pace, Merab's pressure is getting to Umar. That combination, which was really nice in the previous round, didn't have the same zip on it, wasn't able to land. Umar wasn't able to follow it up with a combination of his own. Merab timed him and was able to force him back against the fence again. Round 3 was a real turning of the tide. I know I've used that metaphor a few times, but in a fight where Umar wins rounds 1 and 2, and then Merab wins 3, 4 and 5, I think it is a fair way to describe it. But fair play to Umar, despite being clearly fatigued, he was still shooting for takedowns, going for left kicks, right kicks, techniques that are so energy zapping. But this next clip we're going to look at does come off a failed takedown attempt by Umar. Merab's able to sprawl, and then you're going to see what happens next. At this point, Umar must have been absolutely sick of seeing Merab in his face over and over again. But as you can see here, we've spoken about this so many times. What is Umar expecting right now? Probably a right hand to the body. Instead, at this point, Merab shoots. He's just out of the picture right now. But you can see he grabs onto a single leg of Umar's. And he's putting his shoulder pressure down here whilst having control of this leg. And Merab dips all his weight from his shoulder into the mat and just dumps Umar onto the ground. And normally, you'd see fighters moving their leg out the way at this point, going for some ground and pound. Merab, on the one hand, he definitely doesn't want to engage with Umar on the ground, get swept into submission positions and dominant positions and things like that. But instead, from a gamesmanship perspective, there we go. Exactly what I was wanting to see right here. Merab pointing at Umar. You saw what I just did. This is really important and goes back to the gamesmanship thing that I've said time and time again. Merab is the ultimate 5-round fighter. You're going to hear me say that many times. Hopefully for Merab's sake, you're hearing me say that for a long time to come, because it'll mean that he's in main events and title fights. But he's such a good 5-round fighter. As the tide turns in his favour in that third round, when he dumps Umar, could follow up with some ground control, some ground and pound. Instead, he decides to use that moment to flex on Umar and show him that this is his round. And the fact that Umar is quite slow to get up, really, when perception is key for these judges, it just doesn't look good for Umar, and it looks great for Merab. So again, even though I'm not saying that Umar was mentally broken by Merab, Merab's ability to impose himself on his fights, impose himself on his opponents, that relentless pressure, will eventually get to anyone if they can't handle it. Moving on to round 4, and we do only have one clip to look at from this round because it was largely more of the same. Umar's output had really slowed. Merab was turning up the heat. Umar was still landing some good shots, and we're going to look at a clip where he does land a really nice shot. But he was outstruck, I think, 37 to 15, 16 shots for Umar. And if he was tired in the previous round, he was exhausted here. Merab's right hand to the body into a takedown happened time and time again. More flexing by Merab, more talking to Khabib in the corner. It was another good round for Merab. But I just want to take a look at this clip because in fairness to Umar, he was still landing some good shots. But I just think it was a case at this point that he was just too tired to capitalise on it. So this was at the beginning of round 4, and round 3 had been a really bad round for Umar. So I'm sure that he really wanted to impose himself on this round. And let's just move it forward a few frames. A lovely jab. His reach appears slightly longer than Merab's. In fact, I'm sure it is. So he lands a nice jab there where they both come together. And a lovely, lovely left hand right down the pipe that really forces Merab backwards. Now, I know it came out afterwards that Umar may have broken his hand in the first round. So if he did throw that left hand that hard in round 4, so 3 rounds after he was meant to have broken it, what an absolute beast, what an animal he is. I have nothing but respect for Umar. But at this point, I think he's just too tired to capitalise on it. He lets Merab back up, reset himself. After landing a really solid left hand in round 4, after a bad third round, you really need to capitalise on that. Otherwise, he knows what's going to come back his way. Merab isn't slowing down. So if you land a good shot after a round where you think Merab is actually upping the pace and starting to turn the heat up, you need to make the most of that. However, physically, I just think the demands were too much for Umar. He was so tired, he could land shots, but he just couldn't follow up with the required pressure. He was shooting takedowns takedowns without setting them up, throwing some really nice strikes, nice combinations as we just saw, but he couldn't put it all together because the physical demands of fighting Merab had just proven too much for him at this point. So as you could see, round 4 did see some good moments for Umar, but at the same time, Merab was just able to get the takedowns, land the right hand and takedown over and over again on Umar. So optically for the judges, it just looked like another clear Merab round. So let's move on to the final round, round 5, where Merab was able to put a real stamp on this performance, give the fans what they wanted, and show everyone why he is the best bantamweight on the planet. So with 37 seconds left in this fight, everything Umar was doing at this point did look very laboured. Understandably, those right hands to the body had really started to add up. Along with Merab's relentless pressure, it had all taken a massive toll on Umar. And we'll move this forward a few frames. I almost said no prizes for guessing what happens next, but I guess it's 50-50. Either Merab's dipping his head for the right hand or for the takedown. And as you can see here, it's for the takedown. He snatches onto Umar's leg, his front leg, because he stood in southpaw, lifts him up. And as we saw in the, was it the 3rd round? I think it was the 3rd round. That shoulder pressure from Merab dumps Umar to the ground. And at this point, I'm going to move this forward because this is really important to see as well. Again, reinstating the point for the fact of the judges. He's just dumped Umar onto the ground. I'll have to play that slowly because of copyright. But he dumps him to the ground. Again, another point showing off to the judges. This might be cringy for some people, but I don't think Merab really cares at this point. And how Umar's sort of body language is really negative. Takes him a while to stand up. He doesn't pop straight back up to his feet. Again, this isn't a criticism of Umar as an athlete. His conditioning is ridiculous, I'm sure. But when you're up against this cardio machine, this beast like Merab, anyone who isn't at his level of cardio looks exhausted. And again, there's some more flexing to the crowd. I'm going to play this forward. Playing to the crowd. Umar throws a really, there's nothing on that kick. It's just a really laboured leg kick that misses by a big distance. And Merab absolutely loves that, as you can see. We are just moving this forward because this fight is about to end. Move it forward. I'm skipping forward frames. And as if that wasn't enough, Merab closes the show by showing a jab to Umar, level changing, and getting a takedown. And you've got to remember, in the first, second round, Umar was so explosive with his sprawl. As soon as Merab touched him, Umar was able to get his hips out, his hips back. But right now, all that resistance, purely down to fatigue, had just escaped him. And Merab was able to get a nice takedown to finish the show. And that's where we're going to leave it in terms of breaking down the clips. But I do want to review the main takeaways of this fight. Starting with Umar. He did start well. He won the first 2 rounds. But again, could he have capitalised on that takedown in round 2? I'm sure that him and his team are rewatching that, wondering if they did have Merab down, could they have controlled him on the ground? And that distance, that respect that Umar seemed to give Merab in the first round, would they have done that differently? Again, I'm a fan. I like to watch these things, come up with my own conclusions. There could have been a much more intelligent reason than I can give for why Umar gave him so much space. But I think that was the wrong approach from my point of view. In terms of Merab, I'll say it again, the ultimate 5-round fighter. He won't give up the first 2 rounds, but even if he knows that the first 2 rounds are close but probably not in his favour, he's so confident that on that final stretch, championship rounds and round 3, that he will have an advantage purely because of his conditioning, pressure, and his durability to take a shot. I would love to see this fight again. If Umar had broken his hand in the first round, like he does say, and I have no reason to disbelieve it, then that obviously would be a factor in this fight. I'd love to see these two go at it again. I don't think it should be next, because although it was a close fight, it wasn't controversial. I think Umar should have to win at least one more before he's given a title shot. I'm not a fan of automatic rematches unless there's big controversy or it's really close, but I thought it was a great fight. Both fighters gave an amazing account for themselves, but Merab just again showed his ability to have that extra gear to keep going. Hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. It was good to do a breakdown. Later this week, I'm going to be talking about Nassourdine Imavov and Israel Adesanya, so watch out for that one. Please do like the video, subscribe, and I'll see you guys later.